Good afternoon. Welcome to Lunch with Books, the Wheeling Poetry Series. My name is Sean. If you have a cell phone, will you please silence it at this time? Thank you. We have just a few announcements. This Thursday, the second part of our cooking classes for the Appalachian Craft Series with the Vagabond Chef, Matt Welsh, will start at 7 and we'll be making apple stack cake. Those of you called in to register will get free samples of the said apple stack cake. Then on Tuesday, the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, a shadow play. So it's an ancient form of storytelling right here on this stage. A staged version of the Samuel Taylor Coleridge poem, The Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. That evening on the 29th at 6:30, there's an exhibit being installed upstairs about the 60th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, designed by WVU Professor E. Fulks, and we will talk about that and our democracy on Tuesday at 6:30, October 29th. And on Halloween Day, we'll have our annual Halloween program. There'll be a movie before the program at noon. Not sure what the movie will be yet, but I'll announce it this week. And then we'll have ghost stories, some of which are based on accounts that we've heard before, and some of which are completely made up. So it'll be up to you to, they'll all be very scary, and it will also be the debut of our new Halloween film, which is called America's Most Haunted Library. Do not miss. Now, I bring to you the host and curator of this program, the Wheeling Poetry Series, and also the West Virginia Poet Laureate of our state, Mr. Marc Harshman.
Thanks, Sean. As always, sincere thanks to you and to Julia for helping out, and we'll remind everybody that what goes on here with Lunch with Books, Sean's, the amazing programming here at the library for Wheeling is just truly astounding, and we all cannot thank him enough, it seems to me. Welcome to the Wheeling Poetry Series. Just a couple of little announcements. Coming up in the new year, our next reading will be Sean Thomas Doherty, a marvelous poet from Erie, Pennsylvania, and I know you'll love him. That's all I can say. I'll mention that both Raechel and Sarah have their newest books for sale here on the table, and encourage you to come up and see them afterwards. And so begin. Ladies, I don't even think I told you who's going first, but Raechel, you're going first unless you and Sarah have made other plans. Rachael Peckham is the author of Alight, Flights of Prose, and from UnCollected Press, and Muck Fire, Prose Poems from Spring Garden Press. Her essays and prose poems have appeared most recently in Blood Tree Literature, Cloudbank, Club Plum, and Still, the Journal. Rachel's a professor of English at Marshall in Huntington, of course, where she lives and teaches alongside her husband, poet and essayist Joel Peckham. And Joel is here, which is a special pleasure for me because you may remember that Joel was a part of the Wheeling Poetry Series, but I believe virtually back in 2021. It seems a long time ago now, so pandemic, how bizarre. What to say about Raechel? Well, this new book of hers is a true tour de force. And that made me think, okay, what does that really mean, a tour de force? It means a display of strength, skill, or ingenuity, or in this case, a display of all three. The emotional strength of sharing these gut-wrenching episodes of a family tragedy, I believe, are unmatched in contemporary nonfiction, if I say so myself. The skill with which she weaves prose poetry into a single compelling narrative is unparalleled in anything I've read lately. And ingenuity, ingenious they all are, as you are about to discover. Please welcome Rachael Peckham to Wheeling.
Thank you, Marc. Thank you, seriously, for the invitation. I've long admired this series, and Sarah and I are colleagues and kind of authorities on what makes for a good reading series, having coordinated them ourselves at Marshall and other places. And this one is truly fabulous, and I've admired it from afar, i.e. on email. So it really is a treat to get to be here, and this space is amazing. As someone who loves mid-century modern design, and it's a library, it's like the mothership calling me home. I might not want to leave, so I really do appreciate getting a chance to be with you today here. And it's kind of a indulgence to be able to sneak in some prose. I know this is a poetry series, but I'm the kind of writer who likes to kind of straddle those boundaries. So I'm going to read some brief essays in this collection, just a couple, because I'm hoping they'll help contextualize the prose poems that I'll read. And I do need to give you just a little bit of background about this collection. It's a rather short one, but it is kind of heavy material. 3 years before I was born in 1976, and I grew up in southern Michigan on a big pig farm, believe it or not. And my mother's father and her 2 adult brothers were farmers as well. So both sides of my family, many generations of farmers. And my grandfather and uncles were headed to a farm machinery show in Mankato, Minnesota, called Farm Fest. And it was about this time of year, right? Sort of right at maybe a little bit earlier. It was the start of harvest. And they had commissioned a local pilot to fly them to expedite the trip because it was going to take them away from their fields for too many days otherwise. And they were not, strangers to doing that kind of thing. They were kind of fun-spirited men. And so it wasn't unlike them to it was unusual that they would take off at the beginning of their harvest work, but not so unusual that they would fly. They loved to fly, and one of my uncles even had a private pilot's license. But my mother didn't even know that they had gone on this trip until she received a phone call very late at night from her Methodist pastor, who asked to pass the phone to my dad and delivered the news that the plane carrying her dad and brothers had crashed on approach to land. And so, as you can imagine, that kind of mass loss was just devastated not only my family, but the community. And the farming community is really close-knit one. And so in the wake of this tragedy, the community really pulled together to help harvest the crops and feed the cattle, and it was just this profound sort of coming together in support of my family. But I grew up not really knowing much about the accident because my grandmother and aunt and my mother just couldn't really talk about it, understandably. So I had a lot of questions as a child. I knew that they had died in a plane crash, but I didn't know anything more than that. I didn't really know who they were, and this really kind of haunted me growing up. So when I studied creative writing in college, I slowly began to write about this part of my family history, and my mom was not resistant to it. My dad was. He was very worried about my mom kind of drudging up that profound grief. But over time, she got so that she could write me letters about what had happened and mainly who her dad and brothers were. That's what I really wanted to know. So this collection encircles those questions. And so I'm going to start with a piece called The Portrait, and I don't think I need to give you any more backstory than that. The Portrait. To read a story about your people, there's no separating the characters from the reader. I stepped right inside those scenes. I heard the pastor on the line asking to speak with Mike, my father. I saw the anguish on my mother's face coming up the walkway to deliver the news to her own mother, Ruth, then turn in the direction of her younger brother's room. I heard my grandmother's gasp, "Dean is with them." Growing up, I had only vague knowledge of that night, but as the story materialized in my mom's words, in an installment of letters she scribbled on a yellow legal pad and sent me in college, it was like watching a Polaroid photo develop. With each word, the loss registered finally as mine, my grandfather, my uncles. Until then, they'd been everywhere and nowhere at once. I'd known them only in the abstract, in the past tense, in framed photographs, and in a life-size painting that filled an entire wall of my childhood home. Standing before that painting, my grandfather and uncles held me in turn with their gaze. This was years before I'd read about the theories of Franz Anton Mesmer, a doctor in 18th century Austria who recognized that between the body and certain objects, there passes a magnetic force. We feel mesmerized in the presence of these things, pulled in by their energy and stilled, if only for a moment. Scrawled in the bottom right-hand corner of the painting is the artist's insignia and year, V. Lee, 1978. Virginia Lee Thornton attended church with my parents in Coldwater, Michigan. When Mom commissioned Virginia to make the painting, she provided Virginia with a combination of photos, including one from a major farming magazine that had run a feature on her late father. It's a glossy image of Robert Bob Owen Smith staring back from an open cab tractor in the middle of a field. The sun is noon bright. My grandfather, a harmless flirt his whole life, is turned in the tractor seat looking back at us with soft eyes. It's more than a tableau for a painting. This single image of Bob confirms my sense that he was a deeply kind, if not sensitive man, a jocular spirit prone to bouts of melancholy. I've constructed my own portrait of him, formed from snippets of stories about the ice cream he ate straight out of the carton with my sister, his first grandbaby, on his lap, about how he credited this part of himself to the housekeeper, a deeply spiritual and loving woman who helped raise him and his 6 sisters after their mother died in childbirth, about his tendency to tease, slapping a guy in the back with a fistful of dried cow patty, about his striking good looks, a fact reputed by friends, men and women alike, and captured by Virginia's skilled hand. Even at 55, my grandfather's age when he died, Bob cuts a sharp figure, the way middle age will pronounce a man's ruggedness all the more for the creased eyes and silvered temples. In contrast, his sons, Doug and Dean, offer a shimmering version of their father's younger self, just as broad in the shoulders, but leaner, more sun-kissed. At 28 and 18, the Smith boys, as they were called, stand on either side of the tractor, waist deep in corn, dressed in casual clothing as though conjured there in a dream. In some ways, the painting's reconstruction is fitting if you know the circumstances surrounding their last flight, not of what happened on that mid-September day in 1976, but of who they were and how they came to be on that plane in the first place, a series of converging paths that could have been otherwise, gone elsewhere, but did not. My mother insists it wasn't like her dad and brothers to drop everything at the beginning of harvest, no less, to fly to Farm Fest, a popular farm machinery show in Minnesota. It was the kind of thing a farmer like Bob, so pragmatic and wary of ambitious ventures, likely vetoed at first. You want to fly where? The kind of thing that would have appealed more to a younger and hungrier farmer like Doug, newly in business with his dad, and anxious to grow Smith River Farms, already one of the largest cattle operations in Michigan. Even so, I suspect it wasn't my uncle who first engineered the trip to Farm Fest. In my mind, it began with a simple errand, running to Hadley's to pick up a part, as I'm told the Smiths did on a regular basis. It was there that Cliff Hadley, the owner of the John Deere dealership in town, would have made small talk about equipment or the weather or any number of things farmers like Doug were likely to be asked about when the talk somehow turned to flying. Specifically, to the new twin-engine Beechcraft Baron Cliff had just bought for himself. Less a toy than an investment. It seated 6, perfect for his latest side gig flying short private trips. Problem was, all these homebodies in this small town. He needed a good trip to pitch, something that would appeal to his customers, to farmers. Maybe Doug studied the advertisement for Farm Fest. Maybe he saw the location, Mankato, and laughed. It'd take a day just to get there, another to come back. That was 3 whole days lost. They couldn't afford that during harvest. Not if you fly. Too expensive. Not with 5 people. Maybe my Uncle Doug did the math. He and his dad, of course, plus the 3 other hired hands employed then at Smith River Farms, Scott Anderson, Jim Troyer, and Jim Nowak. Maybe. So, juxtaposed with narrative about the plane crash and about my grandpa and uncles, I also weave in my account of taking a flying lesson during a sabbatical that I had in 2016 as a way, not for fun. I dreaded it, but I was trying to get a handle on my near-phobic fear of flying, which I have always felt, even when I was very young. I've always hated flying. So my younger brother, who ironically is a pilot, commercial pilot, talked me into taking a flying lesson. And so I drove to Ohio University one October day, it was beautiful like this day, and took a flying lesson there. And so this is about a moment during that lesson. Drop it down to 1,300 feet, Ryan says this like it's a natural thing to do, slowing down the airplane to a crawl mid-air. I'd rather not. He glances over to see whether or not I'm joking, and partly I am. But a larger part of me has dreaded this moment all along, the beginning of our descent. When I hear pilots announce this point in the flight, I always feel a mixture of relief that it will soon be all over, and dread that it could soon be all over. I pull the throttle back like I'm cutting a wire on a bomb. You don't have to go that slowly, Ryan coaches, motioning for me to pull harder on the throttle and relax your grip. You're not going to do anything dangerous. I won't let you. His reassurance reminds me of the typical things parents say, pushing a child's bicycle before letting go or holding out their arms, coaxing a shivering child to jump in the water. Just trust me. Meeting him for the first time, I felt myself sizing up Ryan, assessing his demeanor for any sign of unreliability, as though his body language and appearance were apt predictors of pilot error. What I was struck by instead was the disconnect between the way I'd imagined him based on his voice, low and somewhat flat over the phone, and his actual appearance. For some reason, I pictured him being taller, with light brown hair and gray eyes, someone I see now who resembles my brother John. When John began flying for the airlines, passengers used to peek inside the cockpit as they boarded, sometimes teasing my brother for his young age, and sometimes he'd tease them right back. This is my first flight. It was almost a blessing when his hair started graying in his mid-20s. Ryan, on the other hand, has reddish hair and freckled fair skin. Something tells me he will always look young, and he is. Just a few years out of school and $80,000 in debt for it, he adds. But like every pilot I've ever met, he has a quiet confidence about himself, a level-headedness that borders on stoicism if it weren't for his eyes, hazel with flecks of gold, warm eyes that immediately put me at ease. Still, when I ask Ryan if he's had any training or firsthand experience with spatial disorientation, say in a flight simulator, He says no. Instead, his own training focused heavily on flying by instrument flight rules, a practice that can be achieved even in good weather by pulling a hood or visor over the windshield so that the student pilot can't see out. If you were to take more lessons, he notes, I'd have you do that, you know. Sign me up. I meant it only half sarcastically. A part of me is curious to know what it feels like to let go of my visual bearings and to trust the flight instruments over my body. Could I do it? Would I be able to ignore my body and still control the plane safely? When I mention this to John later, he says there is a way to simulate this feeling with something called the Barony chair, named after the Austro-Hungarian autologist Robert Barony. It's a special swivel chair used in aviation programs to demonstrate the effects of spatial disorientation. The Barony chair's design is simple, consisting of a metal handlebar that encircles and swivels with the chair, reminding me a little of the tilt-a-whirl ride at the fair, so that the instructor spinning the chair can do so steadily and smoothly with the handlebar, even changing direction suddenly, with more control than he'd have just pushing on the back of the chair. To see it in action, I click on multiple YouTube videos featuring a variety of aviation students, each taking a turn, spinning around and around blindfolded. Sometimes they're instructed to lean forward and rest their heads on the handlebar, or to turn their heads suddenly, or to point their thumbs in the direction they feel themselves spinning. In each case, after 20 or 30 seconds, the instructor stops the chair, removes the student's blindfold, and instructs the student to perform a task. Walk to the door. Point at the wall clock. Come shake my hand. They all fail. If they're told to get up and walk, they stumble or lean in the opposite direction. If they're asked to hold their arms straight up in the air like in a touchdown, their arms are angled forward in a dive. It's a troubling illustration, but one that elicits hoots of laughter from the other students. We all know this game. We learned it a long time ago. At birthday parties where the donkey's tail never finds its proper place, stuck instead to its head or belly, and on the playground, where we spin each other on swings or on the merry-go-round, or simply in a game of our own making, dizzy with the fun of feeling unhinged from the world beneath us, its order, its grip loosened for a few seconds, while we teeter along that delicate line between flying and falling. Thank you. Well, I promised you some poems, so I am just going to read a couple. It's all good. All right. So I'm just going to give you a taste of the prose poems, and this one is called First Theory. In my I guess you could call it a hometown, though I grew up way in the country, but the closest town is where we'd go to church and go grocery shopping and whatnot. And it's called Coldwater, Michigan. And still to this day, people in the community there occasionally will work up the courage to ask my family if anything was ever solved about the crash. And it wasn't. It remains unsolved. There was no black box or anything, and the destruction was so great that they'll never be able to solve it. But they think it was that the pilot got disoriented, which is why I'm interested in this idea about spatial disorientation. But several people kind of came to their own, sometimes bizarre theories about what happened mid-flight. So this is called First Theory. About a year after your mother's two brothers and father died in flight, we shopped for a new car, a safe car. But the sales guy didn't want to talk cars, but about the crash. He had a theory. We didn't know any better then. Just how the Beechcraft flew and drew up his hands to show the plane circling back and the flaps, now his other hand, folding in all that carbon monoxide tight, just tucked them all to sleep. Then snapped his fingers. You see? We were trapped. I pressed your mom's back toward a blue sedan, but she wanted a wagon, something boxy as a tank, something with a bumper, she said, and circled back around the Buicks, bought one with doors as dense as wood and paneled like it too. Tell me, can you make out the bumper on this coupe? Now they stuff them full of bags. They found that much out. So tell me how it's still safer in the air than on the ground. Tell me why they'll make a bag inflate and not a chute. Tell me your theory on that. There are other prose poems I won't read that take up the point of view of various witnesses who heard the plane go down. But I'm going to end with the very last piece, which is a prose poem about an experience that my grandma had, and she didn't talk about it. She was a nurse, and she had this, she witnessed something of her own that I didn't learn about until I came across a clipping that she had cut out from the newspaper and saved, and it was among her belongings after she died that I inherited. So this is called Last Testimony. A passerby, a guy who hauled grain, spotted it first and jumped from his cab to knock on the nearest door. I'm sure my grandma crossed her arms, so cautious, and probably pressed for time, dressed in her nursing uniform, and it makes me think she knew this guy. Why would she follow him otherwise? Or maybe she looked into his unblinking eyes, big as saucers, we say, and realized he needed help. Or maybe she heard in his tone someone else's emergency, that adrenaline surge to the legs. She follows his hand, now stabbing the sky at a spot, just a quarter-mile up over the channel, where she and my grandpa lived years before he died in an airplane. And you better believe I see the cliche, done to death, as we say, the cigar-like craft, hovering in the air, long enough for a fishing boat to pass and wave at my grandma, and then bam, it disappears. Silent as quicksilver slipping from the palm, or like a dot of static on the television, that quietly gone. Not a trace of exhaust in its place. But the image will stay perched in her mind. She'll try to describe it, first with her neighbors, then to the town when the daily shows up, and here's the takeaway. The peculiar stillness of a thing so near to the ground, you'd expect to hear some fire in the engine, some kind of idling sound. But it wasn't flying at all. What my grandmother saw, it wasn't any kind of flight she recognized. Thank you.
You really need to get this book, don't you? You just got snippets of the story. It's really, it's very powerful. Thank you, Raechel. And I even checked out the barony chair. No, that looks scary enough, just I don't like the psychological ramifications of what might happen. Thank you again, Raechel. And we're not done. Sara Henning is with us. Sara is the author of the poetry collections Burn, Southern Illinois University Press 2024, brand new. She has copies here today, receiving great reviews. 2022 Crab Orchard Series and Poetry Editor's Selection, Terra Incognita, Ohio University Press. She's winner of the 2021 Hollis Summers Poetry Prize and View from True North, again, Southern Illinois University Press 2018, winner of the 2017 Crab Orchard Series and Poetry Open Competition Award, and the 2019 High Plains Book Award. She was awarded the 2015 Crazy Horse Linda Hull Memorial Poetry Prize and the 2019 Poetry Society of America's George Bogan Memorial Award. And on it goes. She's a recipient of scholarships from the Sewanee Writers Conference and the Appalachian Writers Workshop. It's an impressive resume. She's assistant professor of creative writing at Marshall, where she coordinates the A.E. Stringer Visiting Writers series. Art being an old friend, and so a series should be named after him. Let me quote the first stanza of her poem, Burn. If middle age has a shape, it would be the body singing, word by luscious word, my body's glory caught in my lungs. I know I shouldn't have given away such wonderful words. I'm sure Sarah may likely share them again, but from someone still clinging to middle age, I find these words alone should be enough to convince you we are in the presence of a powerful, needed, and inimitable voice in American poetry in the person of Sara Henning. Please make her welcome to Wheeling.
Wow, what a pleasure it is to be here. I'm a huge fan of Marc Harshman. I think he is a scholar and a gentleman and a beautiful writer, and what an amount of work he does to put in to run a series such as this. What a pleasure to read with my colleague and friend, Rachael Peckham. We are Marshall strong today, so. I was looking at something on my phone in a small intermission while Raechel was reading, because I just was so taken knowing that Sean Thomas Doherty will be coming and reading for you next month. There was a poem that he had in his the second O of Sorrow that I actually quoted in my job talk when I was applying for the job at Marshall, and it's one that I think has really stayed with me as a writer, and it's called Why Bother? And I want to read it to you because I feel like, besides the fact that it's beautiful and you should go see him, I think it speaks to some of the things that I'm going to be addressing in my reading of my work with you today. Why bother? Because right now there is someone out there with a wound in the exact shape of your words. And that really struck me because I would say Burn in many ways is a sequel to Terra Incognita, which was an elegy that I wrote for my mother who lost her battle with colon cancer in 2016. In many ways, when I think we write about the difficulties in our lives, the people that we have lost, I think there's sort of a dual side of the coin, right? There's, in many ways, we can elegize, we can eulogize who they were and why we loved them, right? But there's also the idea of how do we find meaning in their lives and how do we carry them with us after we lose them? I think that in some ways I struck that balance in Terra Incognita, which unfortunately I won't be sharing poems from with you today. But Burn especially is kind of a byproduct of something that happened to me after my mother passed away. So while this is a book about time and the moments which make us, it's also about this curious condition. Time stopped making sense. And it was bizarre to me. I was in my early 30s. At that point, I'd lost my mother and my father. My father was a fireman, lost in the line of duty when I was a little girl. And, I had this uncanny thing that happened, which was hours would bleed into weeks. People would email me and say, hey, Sarah, did you get my email from, or did you get my email? And I'd say, oh, I think I got it yesterday. And they'd say, I emailed you 3 weeks ago, right? So it was really this defamiliarizing experience that I didn't understand it. And I think what I came to realize was that, my mother in many ways was my compass. She raised me as a single mother in poverty. I grew up on the interstices between Appalachia and the South in Georgia. But in many ways, when she was no longer my compass, I realized that grief was what broke that compass when I lost her. And so, because I'm a nerd, I researched everything in the world that I could about this curious experience about time. And it really took a poem by Delmar Schwartz, who, it's funny because I was talking with Joel about, he quotes this poem all the time in classes to his students, but I found it's just so revelatory to me. And it's just a snippet from Calmly We Walk Through This April's Day. What will become of you and me? This is the school in which we learn. Besides the photo and the memory, that time is the fire in which we burn. I learned that time can be a way that we evolve. Time can be a way that we adapt. It can be a way that we fall apart. It can be a way we learn to love again. If anything, time is our human-made metric for resilience. It covers the wide swath of humanity and human behavior, and I took solace in that, and I think I will always take solace in that. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm going to share a couple of poems today from this book, and I had what you would call a little bit of a rough upbringing. Like I said, we grew up in poverty. My mother worked all the time, and so that left me sometimes in some vulnerable positions. I would like to say that this next poem is about a position where someone in my family saved me, but it was in fact my uncle who did the thing. This is called Stealing Ariel, and it's a pantoum, which is a poetic form. And Ariel is a book of poems by Sylvia Plath. Stealing Ariel. What had I become the night I dreamed I shot my mother's Smith and Weston pistol? I'd never held an oil-slick metal barrel, fingered the grip of a powerful God. I'd only dreamed I shot my mother's pistol, but my aunt's man told the police I cased his Jeep. 17, I'd never fingered the grip of a powerful God. Under his grin, his vows were bitter sugar. He told the cop on call I cased his Jeep, loosened a lug nut, ice-picked his tire. Under his grin, his vows were bitter sugar. She tried to kill my wife, he said. She'd kill. He said, she ice-picked my tire, his lies stiff as gin in the morning. She tried to kill my wife, he said. She'd kill. He hated my mother, which meant he hated me. His lies stiff as gin in the morning. Lights from the cop's car glinted and burned. He hated my mother, which meant he'd hurt me. The cop looked at me like one of his daughters. Lights from the cop's car glinted and burned. Last week, I'd stolen a copy of my mother's book, Ariel. The cop looked at me like one of his daughters. My aunt's man said, honey, your life is over. I thought of Sylvia Plath, her lines, your body hurts me as the world hurts God. Your life is over, the cop said, if you call my station again. Your body hurts me as the world hurts God. I'd never held an oil-slick metal barrel. If you call my station again, he said. What had I become that night? I dreamed. I have another pantoum to share with you. I learned that, recently someone was asking about pantoums and their ability to transmit grief or trauma. And I hadn't thought about it quite that way, but I found myself after my mother passed away writing in what you would call maybe some obsessive forms, the sestina, the villanelle. Those, what those are don't matter as much as the fact that they invite repetition. I'm going to share a story with you that will haunt me, I think, for the rest of my life. I want to issue a trigger warning or a care warning. It does deal with sexual assault. And unfortunately, that's a pervasive horror that we experience even now in the 21st century. When my ex-boyfriend from high school stepbrother returned from basic training, he asked for my best friend's number. We'd all gone to school together. We were all friends. And you know how it is when people graduate or people go off to college or people join the Army, right? Sometimes we all get to come back and visit, and I never thought anything about it. I gave him the number. My friend called me the night they were scheduled to see each other, and she told me that he had raped her. And like I said, I gave him her phone number. She said it wasn't my fault, we're still friends. I get to watch her little girls grow up. They're really cute. They've got this beautiful curly red hair. But in my heart, I feel like it was my fault. Blue. My year of firsts will always burn bright blue. I start with manic panic, my boyfriend's head in the kitchen sink. We cruise in cars, Texaco icy sweet between our knees. My mother worked doubles and binged watch soaps. In the kitchen sink, I dye my boyfriend's hair. His name is Elijah, Hebrew for my God. My mother worked doubles and binged watch soaps. I steal her menthols, nearly fail the SAT. I date a boy named Elijah, Hebrew for my God. We spend prom night in the back of his Chevy Astro. He aced the SAT, helped me pass physics. From him I learned that heat is a measure of disorder. We spend prom night in the back of his Chevy Astro, back when home was a place I couldn't love. If heat is a measure of disorder, does time exist? When we get bored, we wander the aisles at Revco. Home is a city I could never love. When Elijah's stepbrother raped my friend, I blame myself. When we get bored, we wander the aisles at Revco. Back from basic, he begs for her number. I ink it on his hand. He raped my friend. I blame myself. She's married now. Her husband holds her at night. Back from basic, a ghost of a brother begs, inks his rage onto women. She called me after, screaming into the phone. I'm married now. My husband holds me at night. Back then, we cruised in cars, Texaco icy sweet between our knees. When I call her number, I still hear her screaming. My year of firsts will always burn bright blue. Thank you. A happy poem. So sometimes it's beauty that burns, right? I'm a Leo, I love sparkly things. And I want to share a poem with you about my mother's Tiffany lamps because they were garage sale, they weren't anything special, but gosh, did she love them. She loved them, and I loved them. And they're in my house now. And they will be there for the test of time. A brief history of light. They will always be love letters, closed caption transcriptions, unspooling across the TV. My mother, hard of hearing, watched her stories in silence, guiding light, one life to live, living room lit by 2 Tiffany lamps. Deep-throated wisterias, peonies etched against cream at the crown, all of it casts sleek flames at the ceiling. How many times did I stare into a lampshade, its luster blunted through coiled bronze wire and blown febrile, the canopy of glass in rich charade all night. Just like that, my knees are dirt smeared again. Braid down my back, I'm tilling mica from soil at recess, swearing it would catch fire in my hands. I imagine angels tunneling through layers of earth, catching their wings on oak roots, bricks, and those little wounds lodging there, waiting for me to dig them up with sticks. The way it sieved light through its scratched surface, nothing could compete, not the goodies barrettes I'd spend whole hours unearthing while other girls lost themselves in games of freeze tag, not their tortoiseshell glare. Queen of the hunt, I'd strut the cache with me wherever I'd go. So when she died, my mother, I grasped her lamps as if I were pulling slivers of dirt-rough mica from the earth, knowing their iridescence could burn any house down. Keeping an eye on the time here. I'm thinking I had a short one, and then I had 3 others that are kind of short. Maybe I'll read this one. It's another happy, fun, I love food. I don't know. Raise your hand if you love food. There's certain things you love, right? And so many things, the smallest things in the world, they can burn with pleasure. They can be lamps. Gosh, for me, they're those Queen Anne colossal olives. I think they're mazzettas. You can get them at Kroger or whatever. And I will just eat them with a little toothpick or a fork or my fingers, and I just love them. So here's a poem about how much I love olives, and you could say I carry a flame for them. Olives. It's the olive, toothpick stabbed, odalisque sleek in her martini bath. I can't untaste now. Olive soaking her tired body in Epsom, so bored she's glamorous. Iced gin, watch it glisten her, steep her in its aching mirage. Like gasoline in hot air, it kisses her hard. She's a brine hallowed goddess I leave for the end. Or is she little whale, her belly soft with yearning? I can't resist her. Fallen, pine brusque, she's calling from her coo of glass. Olive, thick love, I pluck her with my fingers. I eat her. I ate her. And I do like the occasional martini. 1 is my limit. So I'm going to read another food poem because I think food is something that brings us all together. Any of us in here ever been to a Panda Express? Anyone? It's like a little fast food. You're not missing much, friends. You're really not, if you haven't been there. And if you have been, the orange chicken isn't terrible. But I wouldn't say to go out of your way to go. Around the time I wrote this poem, my marriage wasn't doing well. We just got over the 7-year itch. What do they call that? The 7-year itch? Yeah, oof. We're good now, but some of those first years were not super great. And that's okay, right? We learn to grow into our relationships. But all I wanted to do during those hard years was call my mom. She wasn't there to call. So I want to read you a poem about that. Meditation at Panda Express. My rendezvous begins at Panda Express, slinking between slivers of cabbage. Orange chicken's opulent flame bewitching my fork. Crab Rangoon is a star-shaped pleasure boat, princely, lady killer of salt. I'll slide through cheap red oyster pails, night wishes for dim sum, this sorry effigy. I've learned to love nights in parking lots, Panda Express, its marquee at the drive-thru exalting the stars. I want this bear-shaped oracle to shepherd me, to ease the grief I now mistake for hunger. I focus on freeing my fork from its plastic, hold it up to the light. On nights like this, the sky is shattered blue. Please, my prayer to no one. X's, O's, X's. Saturday's husband, we used to split an orange Julius suck until we could taste each other's salt. We'd summer in beachside condos, sip salt-rimmed margaritas. Now, I fake joy when you won't look at me. Orange you glad I didn't say banana, I joke. Nights, you're no better than a ghost. I think I'll pick up Panda Express, I say, you nod. These days, I learn to please myself. My headlights rapture shadows, please, I say, searching for my face in the salt-kissed streets. It is winter. I want my mother, her yes to everything. Drive-through cruising, forking through lines, our night drives, she'd call them. Dying, I'd feed her orange slices between hits of morphine. Orange rind, orange Julius, orange you glad I didn't say, please don't go. Now, I do the leaving. Night is only darkness reimagined, salt where longing existed, scar-shaped fork. My rendezvous begins at Panda Express. Orange chicken, a better man's swagger of salt. I begin with please, ask for an extra fork. Tonight at Panda Express, I'll eat my heart. Oh, so sweet. All right. I'm going to end on the poem that Marc read a little bit of, because I can't not, right? Marc gave you a little taste, and now I'm going to give you the rest of it. And again, it's a poem that celebrates how our bodies carry us. And it's also the poem I named this collection after. So I ended with it. That's a risky move. I hope it was the right move. I'll also end the reading with it, so there's that. Burn. If middle age has a shape, it would be the body singing word by luscious word. My body's glory caught in my lungs. If I could, I would uncry myself, send my body back to my mother's womb where my father once signed his name in blood. I hung there, seam of cells fixed to my holy order, love's microscopic blaze so much like breathing. My heart still twined to my mother's. Her body, it held me like she hadn't given up. I longed to be pulled from my mother some August long ago and lie on her chest, naked, cord uncut, hair matted to my skull. I want to fill again the hollow in my mother death will not take as its house. Teach me, body, to unscar what is scarred, to cherish the uncharitable, my breasts with philosophers, my eyes a murder of crows. My thighs are engines, leave traces of fire as I rise up. Watch me rise up. Thank you.
both of you. It's such a pleasure to have you with us. Are there questions for our poets today? For anyone? Bob?
This isn't actually a question, this is for Sarah. Just wanted to share something. My friend Ambrose here loves Hollis, and I don't like Hollis. And I think this began at the Whole Foods in Columbus Circle across from that museum in Manhattan. And we would go there and get some lunch on occasion. And they also, where the foods are, they have this long bar with all the kind of balls and he's one on arm like he's all. And he said, so you don't really like olives? And I go, no, I don't. He said, not even the black ones? So that sticks with us as a constant joke. So
You clearly chose the right poem for those two gentlemen. Other questions? Well, please come up. The books are for sale. They're wonderful books. I can testify to that for sure. And thank you all for coming. And Sean Thomas Doherty will be here not next month, but next year. So, but he will be here. He will be here, no problem. So we got plenty of time to get it on our calendars. Thank you again so much.